You're now listening to Vices and Vultures, a podcast on cultures. Welcome back to the Unpacked segment of Vices and Vultures, where we share from our collection of solo interviews done by the co-hosts. What's going on, everybody? This is A2. The next conversation you will hear is with me and Julie Signorelli. I found Julie's story interesting because as she is a pastor and pastor's wife who homeschools her children, these lifestyles overlap some of my own as well. Enjoy.
I'm a homeschool mom who also pastors, and I have a podcast with some friends that, I kind of do as like a hobby and some spare time.
Yeah.
And we, try to stay active and all that stuff. But yeah, in ministry, they call it a full life, right. But it's busy.
Right. Definitely. So yeah, let's actually talk about the podcast a little bit, because that's one of the things I noticed when I started following like V1 and like the people that represent your church. Yeah. V1. So what is the name of it, and like what do you guys get into? Because I know it's several of you.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there's we have our church podcast, so that's V1 Church Podcast.
Right.
That is where you'll find sermons that I preach, and then I have a separate, totally separate podcast called Circle of Trust, which is a group of two. It's really my best friends, but also family. So it's my sister and my cousin. We've been best friends for years, and we're all Christians. We've all been in ministry. And so we just kind of share life. It's actually in the comedy section. I don't know how much you're going to like grow in your leadership. I don't know
Right.
that it's that, but it's more like just funny things that happen to us as humans, as moms, as women in ministry, and just kind of sharing like the ups and downs of life. And
Right.
It kind of started as a joke and then evolved into this thing, and actually ended up charting at some point, which was like really random.
That's nice.
And and now we have kind of like a little, following, I guess. It sounds so silly. But and then my husband has a podcast, and he talks about different life things, relationships, that kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, we're kind of like all over social media a little bit.
Was this always the plan for you? Like any aspect of it, whether it was pastoring or like homeschooling or like even having daughters, was like any of it like along the way, like, yeah, this is what I wanted?
No.
Okay.
Like that's the short answer.
Okay.
I grew up, so I am first generation ministry.
Right.
First generation college graduate. Like, it just people where I'm from the Midwest. So Mike and I are both from Indiana. Where we're from, you grow up, you get a good job, whether you go to college and get a good job, or you don't, and you get a good job and you keep that job for like ever, and that's kind of, we lived in a steel mill culture. I still say it kind of like a hillbilly, a steel mill culture, a very blue collar. So, you basically just work really hard and you provide a good life for your family. That's how I grew up. That is all I know. Very safe. I had an amazing childhood. Mike's story is different. His story, you'll hear that another time, but his was very dark and
right.
And very tragic. Mine was great. I was like, Leave It to Beaver style. Like, it was an awesome, way to grow up in a great town. And so for me, my dream was to replicate what I experienced. So when Michael and I got married, he had a good job after college. We met in college. And I just wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. We had Bella right away after we got married. I just wanted to kind of stay home and volunteer at my local church. Volunteering in our local church was the highest priority in our family when I grew up. We were not in full-time ministry in any way. We just supported our local church, like gave our life to it. And so that was very important to me after we got married. So I loved ministry. I never, ever, ever saw myself in full-time ministry. And that kind of evolved as Michael and I's life in ministry and kind of just different circumstances surrounding our life kind of shaped it. It's like ministry found us. I don't know that we found ministry per se.
Definitely.
Because when I grew up, all the pastors I knew were bivocational or like volunteer. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know people who did this as their livelihood, you know, those two things. So I always wanted to do ministry, but in a volunteer capacity.
Right.
Like, I just wanted to be at home with my kids, and we had a house that was like just a cute little like house that was flipped on a half acre, which I won't tell you the home prices because in the Northeast you would die. We probably could have had like a farm or something.
Oh yeah. I went to college in the Midwest, so I'm very aware of how cheap
okay, you get it.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So, anyways, I thought that house was so small at the time. Now living in an apartment in New York City, I'm like, oh my gosh, the house was ginormous. But it was, so that's what I expected. So to answer your question, I don't know that I ever envisioned having a podcast, preaching every week, traveling. Like, none of that stuff was ever a desire in my mind because I didn't even know it existed at that time.
Yep.
So it wasn't until later, until my husband, we were married and bought a home right around the recession, the 2007, like market crash and all that. So, life kind of took a turn for us and led us kind of down a different road. And it evolved through Mike working at a nonprofit and then eventually working in ministry. Right. And so, and I worked a secular job up until 5 years ago. And it just kind of took its own, like, the Lord was clearly leading us on a journey. We just didn't know it.
When you grow up, you want to be able to experience what you had before if you really enjoyed it. So it's kind of wild to think that, like, everything that you had once thought of, it's just like, now, like, this is reality. But as you said, there was a completely different path being made.
Totally different.
That ride, the metaphorical ride of just going through those ups and downs, when you started to kind of just see, like, okay, I'm supposed to be in ministry, when you kind of had those realizations of all those moments, like, what was that like? It was just like, okay, now I get it. Or was it more like, dang, like, this is what it was? Like, are you sure? Yeah,
I will totally say the people who are supposed to be in ministry are the ones who never wanted to be in it in the first place, Right. Sometimes I'm a little weary of people who are just striving for something, thinking it's a certain way. And I think for us, we were one of those people, like, we're like, Lord, if we could do anything else, like, because, in ministry, it's a harder road. It's a tough road. You live in a fishbowl. You do all those things. And so I remember just being a volunteer. My husband and I were youth pastors, and someone came up to us and said, somebody in our life who's been, just a pillar in our life, came up to us and said, I see you guys traveling. Now, that makes a lot of sense now, seeing us now. But at that time, we were just two people. I worked a full-time job, took my kid to daycare, volunteered at my church on the weekends. Mike was working a full-time job, volunteering during the week and on the weekends. And traveling for ministry, that seemed like such a zealous kind of ambition. I had a hard time wrapping my mind around it. I grew up in a Pentecostal denomination where, you didn't want to be famous. Not famous, but you didn't want to be known. You didn't want to promote yourself. Self-promotion was very much looked at as pride and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm thankful for that heritage because that keeps me super grounded. But it also, I think, narrowed the vision that God had for my life, because the vision that God had for my life was much bigger than I was. Right. And so I remember that was the first time that somebody had seen potential in us for a big vision ministry. And I remember hearing that and thinking, like, yeah, okay, ha, 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 right. And kind of just like, oh, that's a lofty dream,
Like a Sarah moment?
Yeah, like, whatever. Yeah, exactly, like a Sarah moment, for sure. And then, you fast forward 5 years, still volunteering at our local church. At this point, my husband and I were in we were in a marriage crisis, which we are very, we talk openly about that, marriage conferences and different relationship series. And so at this point, now we're in a marriage crisis, and somebody prophesies, or for those who are unbelievers listening, it's just basically just an exhortation about your future. And they give this prophetic word to Michael and I that said, I see you guys ministering together on a platform. Okay, so at that point, we weren't even living in the same house.
Right.
And so I had a real Sarah moment, like, oh, that's cute. You know,
Right.
like, what are you talking about? And sure enough, about, 5 years later after that, you fast forward and there were 1,000,001 things that transpired between then and now, between that moment and 5 years from that moment. And I have this moment where we're on a platform and we're preaching, we're ministering together. And I thought, oh my God, you have fulfilled this word that has been spoken over my life. I just was too narrow-minded to even believe it. So to kind of rewind and go back to your original question when you said, did you ever see this for your life? No way. Like any kind of, I went to school for public relations, and then I went to school for a master's degree thinking that I wanted to teach some entry-level college courses. I mean, that was where my dream was headed. If I could work from home and, be home with my kids more. I mean, that's where my head was. It was never, let's lead this huge multi-site church and, take over, preach on social media and preach on never entered my mind in a million years.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. But I think that's the beauty of life. I call it the beautiful randomness of life, because you don't know what's going to happen. But when you start to become more aware of the fact that, there are powers, there's a power working that is greater than you, then for me, what it looks like is I start to get just a little bit more, I get more excited, where it's just I don't know how this is going to come about, or, I get a little bit more ready, because readiness is important, and preparation.
Yeah.
And just receiving whatever it is, because we all go through different seasons, and we all have to make sure that our mind is right to receive the lessons that we're learning, because at the time that you were told, hey, this is what you're going to be doing, you're saying, no, that's not. But then when you realize it's just, you were more ready to receive that revelation. If you hadn't been ready at that moment, then it would have taken you even longer to been okay, now I get why I'm doing this. And that happens so many times, with people, especially when they, commit to that. And that's what I love about spirituality, because as much as it's been a light for so many people, it also speaks a lot to self-awareness and just what's going on your inside and how that's affecting everything else. So just to switch gears a little bit. So you have two daughters. You have Bella and Everly, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I've been following for a while. I've been keeping
that's tight. I like that.
Yeah, for sure. No, I like following Mike's stories and just kind of seeing the personalities and who got what, especially as far as who looks like who and things. I always think that's fun. So as I had mentioned before, I started teaching a year ago, and one of the things that I really fell in love with was just being able to observe the family dynamic. And because whenever I finish teaching, I just let the parents know what's going on, debrief with them, what went well, what they need to work on, things like that. Being able to see that dynamic, I'm observing a lot more about just, what happened in my childhood and what happens now. One of the big things is just navigating culture as a toddler, as a teen, a preteen, or whatever. So how was that for you? Because you have daughters in different age brackets, right?
Yes. Yeah, I have a 5-year-old, Everly's 5, so she's our spicier of the two. And then I have Bella, who's 12, so 12 and a half. Yeah.
Right. So
two different worlds.
Yeah, two completely different worlds, and they get introduced to so many different things. So when you had Bella and just being able to raise her, and just with you guys getting involved in ministry, especially in recent years of your life, how is that been just navigating it with it for her? Because I always have a lot of respect for just people who have daughters in particular, and want to make sure that whatever they interact with, they know that we have to protect and things like that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so I feel like that's really important. And I like talking about this because the conversation that comes about it could really just be helpful, because in ministry, I know that there's just a lot of warfare that you have to like work with, and especially the tech side, there's a lot of aspects that got.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, I want to pick your brain on that because I'm very curious.
Yeah. So growing up is so much different than when I was a kid, because you have now, not only do you have like normal pastor kid stuff that's been around since the beginning of time,
right?
But now you have comparison because you have social media and you have a phone that's showing you how much better everyone is and how much cooler everyone is and how much bigger their church is and how much cooler their dad is or their mom, whatever. And I think we're very aware. So maybe last year, we decided to get Bella a phone because she's at the age now where she might be alone for 20 minutes or whatever. And we don't have a landline anymore. Like, who has that? So we wanted her to be able to call and, just that we're in the car sometimes or she's getting a ride. Sometimes I want her to have connection to us. And once we gave her the phone, I think we were so aware at how it's like you're holding a time bomb, it's just a matter of time before, the enemy who's already wants to attack her destiny is going to come through, this device, which there's nothing evil about a phone, right? It's just how you use it and what you use it for. And we were so aware. And so what we have decided to do is just like, we're heavily involved in like what she has on the tech side. So you mentioned like, what's it like to have a kid in this tech world? So we're super involved on that end. So we got some apps and things that we use to kind of monitor. We have rules, like we don't allow any devices in rooms. Like if you're going to watch a video, just watch it on the couch where we can all kind of see what you're looking at or hear what you're, looking at. We don't allow isolation. And so that's like really key, is because I think once you have a young mind who already is learning how to think and how to put together their identity in Christ, and they're kind of going through that same thing that we all went through as kids, that uncertainty, that insecurity, all that stuff. And now we're giving them a phone, to compare all of that into that window into this whole other life that they may not even know exists.
Right.
It comes with a lot of responsibility. And so we've definitely tightened the reins on what that looks like. And she's a great kid, and I think I'm really blessed. But we're very aware at the pressures of her being a ministry kid.
Yeah.
And so like kind of switching gears. So that's what we kind of do on the tech end, raising a kid in that world. But raising a kid in ministry, we definitely don't have it all figured out. That's for sure. But I think we're just aware. We have people who speak into our life who are that we're accountable to. So we're a part of an organization, and we pull on them for a lot of wisdom. So, for instance, they say take them to all the fun stuff. Let them have a few little perks as a pastor's kid. So when we travel, they get to go. When we take a guest minister to dinner, they get to go, and they get to order dessert.
Right.
So like they get a few little perks. I don't know, it's not a lot or whatever, but they get to experience some of the benefits. So I have a volunteer who helps with my kids on Sunday, and just kind of, hey, do you need to go to the bathroom? Are you hungry? Those kinds of things. And kind of just treating them, instead of just ignoring the fact that their life is hard, leaning into the fact that their life is hard, and just having that be like a regular conversation in our home. So for instance, yesterday, I was like, Bella, how was Easter for you? Were you okay? And kind of gave her some props and encouraged her. And then we took her out for her favorite meal. So just kind of acknowledging, like, we know there's pressure, but also I think sometimes churches or pastors can put so much of an emphasis on their life is hard that it becomes harder than what it really is, because it's also this big, huge, fat blessing in their life. Like, they have 400 people that care so much about them, that would do anything for them. And so, yeah, you get some bad that comes with that, but there's a lot of good. Mm-hmm. So my kids always have, somebody's always bringing them a treat or a piece of candy or a toy or taking them somewhere, and so I don't focus too hard on the negative. I'm like, hey, it is hard, but look at all these benefits. Look at all these things that you have. You have people who pray for you. You have more people praying for you than probably I have,
right.
you know? And so, because they do know it's hard. So I think kind of focusing, if you're raising kids in ministry, yeah, you acknowledge the negative, but you also, you know, don't be afraid to let them know all the great things about being in ministry are. Yeah. You know, we constantly, like, our kids every Sunday are so excited to go to church. And at the moment that they dread going, that's when I'm going to reevaluate how I'm parenting. Because if my own kid is dreading it, then I'm doing something wrong. And I can't be too prideful to acknowledge that.
Right.
And so, like, for every day, my daughter wakes up and says, are we going to we call our office the HQ. Are we going to the HQ? Are we going to B1? And I'm like, no, not today. That's on Sunday, you know? And we're really careful to call church and work. So, and not to mix up those two worlds. Like on Sunday, Daddy isn't working. He's at church. But on Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5, he's working, you know? And so we're really careful about the verbiage we use, because you don't be mad at Daddy for serving the local church. That's a blessing and an honor in our life. If you're frustrated about the 9 to 5, okay, well, we can work on that. We can talk about that. But that Sunday life, that's never going to change. And that's a blessing and an honor in our family. And we just focus all on that.
Right.
And so far it's worked. I don't know.
Yeah.
Time will tell.
For sure. No, it's all conditioning. But there's something else that you mentioned. You talked about isolation, which I think is really big. A lot of what happens as far as just, what is the saying? An idle mind is the devil's playground.
Oh, for sure.
It occurs from isolation, and no education happens in isolation because you're not taking the time to like surround yourself with people who are just being like, hey, there's actually another option, because what you're doing here is not necessarily going to be great for you in the short term or in the long term. So I really like how you said isolation. I think that's really big. But with what you have done so far, like, you know, raising 2 girls and then now having this huge platform where they're surrounded by this community, what lifestyle changes did you have to make over these past couple of years to maintain that? Because it's a lot of things to juggle, and they might go together really well, but they also, I'm sure, have, you know, separate purposes and like responsibilities and priorities and things like that.
Yeah. Well, if there's one thing that's just a constant balancing act, or if there's one thing I'm constantly reevaluating, it is that rhythm, you know, of how do you manage all of it, you know? And I think the key word has been be flexible, or I guess the key sentence would be like, be flexible in transition. Like, you know, for the past 3 years, we have been in constant transition and being okay with that. You know, something we did was we started homeschooling. So we knew that we were going to have a couple moves ahead of us as we plan our church and as we get grounded. And the most important thing was just kind of getting here. So we couldn't be too choosy about where we live and what school and all that. So we're like, we'll just homeschool. And then that solves the problem. And we can be more agile, more flexible. And so that was the first thing we did. So that kind of set us up for, hey, I can't maybe control the Monday through Friday. I maybe can't control even the next 6 months, but we'll be able to control how and when we do school, you know? And so that was one of the things that we did. Another thing we did was when our schedules stopped working for us, we changed it. So I love what Lee Cockrell, he was the VP for Disney. So he had like 20,000 employees. I don't know if you've ever read any of his stuff. It's brilliant. But he talks a lot about time management and all that stuff. So we got a lot of ideas from that. But what he says, hire slow, fire fast. And so what we do is we start slow, but when something isn't working, we get rid of it completely.
Gary Vaynerchuk talks about that too.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we go slow, and then when it's not working, we get rid of it fast. So for instance, yesterday, Mike and I had a family meeting, and we're like, our schedule isn't working. So we changed the whole thing. And now I think we're here's the thing, balance, work-life balance in ministry. I can't speak for other career paths because I don't know. I'm not in those. But for ministry, it is not a balance. It's rhythm. And so you're going to go in fast rhythms and you're going to go in slower seasons. And so when it's fast, you got to adapt really quick. And then when it's slow, you kind of got to reevaluate and gear up because it is going to get fast again, you know? So for us, it's always like, what's the rhythm? Is everyone, okay, it's really busy, but is everyone happy? Is there peace in our home? Are we getting along? Are we going on dates? Are we, you know, and kind of just like evaluating all that stuff. And then it may not work for someone else from the outside looking in, but for us, it might be working great. We just got out of a season where we're like, our schedule is not working anymore. And so we flipped it. And so now we kind of adjusted. We went from having Fridays off. We went from having Mondays off to now we're going to have Fridays off. And that was a good change for us because Monday we're amped up, we're excited, we're ready to get into the week. And so having Monday off, it was like there was tension in our home because Mike and I felt like we wanted to work. Our kids wanted to relax. It wasn't working. So we just reevaluated really fast.
Right.
So, you know, I think for us, it's just been be sensitive to the environment. And when there's tension, something isn't working. So either hearts need to change or schedules need to change. For us, it was a schedule thing. It wasn't a heart thing. But sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes it's, hey, we can't do anything about this as a family. So we all need to be understanding. And maybe we need to change our hearts about it, you know? So I would say for people in ministry, just be like that's the 11th commandment, right? Thou shalt be flexible. So
there you go.
It's okay.
I like
Something
it.
isn't working. It's fine.
I like
you know?
it. I like it. And, you know, I just think it's so important to understand that, you know, like life is not going to go how you're going. It's how you want it to go. Like every time you just have to take the time to just adapt. I actually wasn't really a PK until about, I want to say 5, maybe 6 years ago.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so...
teach me something. Tell me something.
I mean, I feel like I've always been in that situation because my family has always been involved in the church. Like, it's just been my life. But only in a traditional capacity. So, for me... growing up in a very interesting, like I grew up in probably the funkiest transition where the technology like changed very drastically when I grew up. And it was kind of wild to kind of like observe. Yeah. For me and anybody else affected by it, it was just, you know, how do we deal with this change? Going back to your conversation about like Bella and like how you manage her as far as like her phone, it's how you use it. It's like, it's how you use it and it's your mindset in how you go into it. And also, like, there's a lot of nuances about it that need to be understood. Even before social media existed, like, comparison existed. It just got pushed to the forefront with what's available now. So now everybody's looking, trying to figure out, like, oh, I'm trying to do this. And so, like, the mindset that kind of goes into social media is super important because if you don't have that mindset, then you're not going to be in a position to handle, like, the different like little things well. Yeah. And
it's so true.
Yeah. So even like with like the mindset of like where with what you have going on as far as what you talked about with like preparation and stuff like that, or just like changing schedules, it's just that type of method is so efficient because of the fact that if you don't do that, then you're just going to continue like trying to dance around what's wrong. It's just like when there's an issue, you just solve it fast. Do you feel that a lot of times you're just waking up every day as a problem solver?
You know what? I have felt that in times, for sure, especially as, you know, I think my husband and I, we co-lead together, but even as, you know, I'm a co-lead pastor, but I'm also a pastor's wife. And I'm proud of both of those titles. Like I'm proud to be Mike's wife and I'm proud to co-lead our church. But there are times when we're co-leads and then there's times when I'm his wife. And there are times as a wife where I feel or I have felt like I am a problem solver. I'm solving homeschool problems. I'm solving, you know, runny noses and dinner and people's marriage crisis and financial things and all that stuff. But then what has been pivotal in Michael and I's, I guess, ministry career, if that's a thing. I mean, obviously it's a calling, but just for the sake to give people context, because we weren't always in ministry. As long as we've been in ministry as a full-time capacity, whether that was compensated or not, because you can definitely be in full-time ministry and still do something totally different as your livelihood. But for as long as that, I had to learn very quickly that my identity is not in my ability to pastor. My identity is not in my ability to be a rock star mom or to solve people's problems or to give them the best prayer. My identity is in Christ. And that is the beginning and the end of who I am. And I'm that first. And every day, Michael and I remind ourselves, we are not pastors. We're a son and daughter of God who pastor along the way. So we might plan a bunch of campuses along the way. We might have some podcasts along the way. We may have, a viral clip along the way, or, people might get healed or have these powerful worship or healing encounters along the way. But our identity and our main focus is that we're a son and daughter of God. And when I get in that mode of, I'm just a problem solver. And I do. I mean, that's a very real place that I can get, especially as in a maternal instinct and in a maternal leader. I remind myself that is not my identity. And that keeps me humble. It keeps me grounded. And it reminds me that these are just things that I get to do. And so they're a blessing in my life. And that gives me some perspective, and that really helps me. And so I'm thankful for our pastors that sent us to plant B1 Church, Pastors Dave and Vanessa Gargano from Road to Life in Indiana. They were the ones that really ingrained that in us and taught us how to do ministry as out of our identity as a son and daughter of God. So it's going to be successful sometimes, and people are going to be celebrating you, and then you're going to have seasons where everybody hates you. And that's just the nature of being a public figure. That's just part of it. But that doesn't negate who you are in Christ and why you do what you do. And that's it.
Yeah, so. No, definitely. When I ask about problem solving, I actually look at it as with a bit of excitement, because going back to teaching again, I like the idea of the longer that I spend doing something, the better I get at it, and the quicker I become at just like, how do I help people's problems? So
and that is a great feeling.
Yeah. So like on a ministry level, when you're counseling couples, like you get to the point where you're just, okay, I've done this enough where it's just like, I think I have a good idea of how to modify, how to say this, that, and the third for each and every type of person, because it's all different. Like every single personality that you run into is super different, whether you're teaching in ministry or whatever. So like last question on that note of just getting better at something with time, I'm curious, because we talked a lot about Bella and her upbringing, as far as like introducing the technology and like what you've done to kind of circumvent like anything that could go wrong. So what does the conversation look like as Everly grows up and she starts to see, the technology being used, and she starts seeing like, cause I see her on Mike's story and things like that. And so I just always think, because the thing about children is like they have a very, very pure innocence to just like their mind of what's going on. And so obviously conditioning is super important. But this is your second kid. This is your second daughter. So what is it like for Everly as far as just having those conversations?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I'm hoping the second time we do it better.
Right. No, you always wish that.
For sure. The poor guinea pig, poor Bella. But I think with her, I think you have to be sensitive to the season, because technology for her is going to look different.
It is.
It's so funny. Almost her entire pre-K program is on an iPad. That's crazy. Yeah. The traditional paper and pen. And so, it's like it's going away. I mean, even though we still do it, it's still kind of not as prevalent as this techie thing. Yeah. But I think for us, it's funny because I saw she takes selfies on my camera, and she's got her little duck lips and her peace sign, and she's just emulating what she knows. At 5 years old, I don't think she's trying to be anybody, but it's what she sees, and it's what she sees on YouTube and all that stuff. And she's definitely a techie. So there's a genuine love for technology. So I don't want to squelch that in any way. Our goal is, we tell our kids, whatever you do it unto the glory of the Lord. So you can use a cell phone and blow up your whole life, your whole marriage, your whole future, because that stuff never goes away.
Right.
Or you can use it as a tool to minister to others. And so that's my husband. He has like a vlog, and the kids are always doing stuff. There's always a ministry moment at the end. We're just showing them like, hey, you can be a part. You can step into culture. I don't want to be the homeschool mom that shields them from, don't listen to the top 40. Don't listen to, this or that, or, can't watch YouTube, can't do that. It's like, no, how do we use these tools that are in the earth to minister to others, and also, use them unto the glory of the Lord? It doesn't all have to be evil. Some people use wine to do communion, and some people use wine to get trashed and ruin their life. Doesn't mean that the wine is bad. It's just all about how you're using it.
Yep.
And so for us, I look at a phone a lot like that, or technology.
Exactly.
It's like, we just had a conversation with Evie, about our little selfies, and we're like, why are you doing, trying to get information. And she's like, and we just encouraged her, like, you're beautiful. God made you. And you don't have to take a picture to,
validate that.
Feel cute. Yeah. And so we just speak to it because it's there. You're not going to, we don't listen to secular music in our home. It's not because we're against it. We actually love music. We love being relevant. It's just, I don't know. It's just not on our playlist or whatever. Not that we're holy or anything like that. But they know all the top 40 songs because we're outside. So you're never really shielding them. It's either you teach them how to do it now, or you let them go and access later, and they have to learn it on their own. And I'd much rather them learn it under the jurisdiction of my husband and I's guidance than to shield them from it and then hand them an atomic bomb later on in life and,
No,
have to figure it out.
It makes sense. And you can see the principles that guide like each way of thinking. And it's always interesting because even though I grew up in a more traditional context, I've always been a lot more curious about technology, and not like a hardware like techie, for instance, but it's just something that I look at and I'm like, I understand it. And, but I also know like the double-edged sword of what it is. So like guidance is super important, because the difference for me is just like I wasn't surrounded by a lot of people who understood it, so it was tougher for me to navigate it because I hit like so many road bumps, like when I didn't need to, but just because I didn't know. But it's really cool to kind of just see like how that plays out, because now there's more education, now there's more people who understand like what it can do, and I feel like we can almost better anticipate what goes on in the future. But as you said in the beginning, right, you don't really know what it's going to bring. So
and I will say this, one of the things that we really instill in our kids, and it's the last thing I'll say about it, is we would rather them be producers than consumers. So if you're going to be all about YouTube, well, let's make some content. Let's not just consume it. You know, let's get good at this. My kids, they podcast on their phone, and I mean, nobody hears it, but it's super cute. And they're using that technology to contribute instead of just like consume, It's because that makes you a critic. It doesn't make you a producer. So so that's like another thing is like, if your kids are obsessed with it, find out ways that they can create stuff and not just consume it.
I think that's super practical. It keeps their mind in a really pure place about what it can do, but also aware of what it can do if you're not utilizing it correctly. Julie, thank you so much for taking the time.
Gosh,
it means a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Vices and Vultures, and considering being a supporter of this project.
Even leaving a review on your preferred podcast platform goes a long way for us.
There is more information about this episode, as well as who we are, in the show notes.
This includes all of our social media links, so you can see us and not just hear us.
Vices and Vultures is brought to you by Aesthetic, and is based in the great state of New York.
Be sure to subscribe to this podcast for more episodes.
And tune in next time to Vices and Vultures.